Hello and welcome to The Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On today's show, I'm joined by super creative Celina Baljeet Basra. In Celina's debut novel, Happy, she introduces us to the protagonist of the same name, Happy. Coming from a farming family in Punjab, we follow him as he makes a huge decision to leave his family home in India and to travel to Europe for work. Celina provides us with a witty and nuanced look into the food industry in Europe, as well as the experience of labour migrants and their families. She raises vital questions around human dignity, human rights, the pursuit of happiness and success in life, and whether we're asking the right questions with regards to living ethically. Happy is written in a non-traditional format, making the reading experience so much more interesting. I'm so glad we're speaking today. Celina is a writer and curator based in Berlin. She graduated from the Free University of Berlin, where she studied art history in a global context, and has since worked with Berlin Biennale, Galerie in Turm, and other institutions at the local and international level. She has a range of residencies under her belt, and she was awarded both curatorial and literary research scholarships from the Berlin Senate. She is a founder of the Department of Love, a curatorial collective. Hi Celina, thanks for joining me on the Diverse Bookshelf podcast today. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. I'm so happy I can join you. It's a beautiful day out in Berlin, a beautiful October day, and so happy to talk to you.
I'm so glad that you're here on the show today. Before we get into talking about Happy, which is your novel, which is out in mid-November, I'd just like to know a little bit about your writing journey. What's led you to work on Happy and produce this really interesting and really sort of new and fresh novel?
I think I've been sort of trying to write or thinking about the world of the novel ever since I was a teenager, because I think I always wanted to be a writer, but somehow I needed a lot of time to find the right voice and structure, and to also find a way in which I would sort of go beyond the hopeful beginnings, and never feeling the voice was quite right. And I think I've been moving to Berlin to study, and then working in the arts for quite a few years, before I then sort of allowed myself to set aside big chunks of time to work on this novel, at times almost then full-time, always in the mornings. And it was the beginning, the prologue, cover letter written by Happy, that sort of gave me the entry into his voice. And then I just had a wonderful flow. Once I found the voice, and also just had a lot of fun writing, and gave myself the freedom to maybe leave some traditional, ideas of what a structure of a book should be behind. Then I could really go into it, and it just worked miraculously.
So I think one of the things that's very striking about the novel is its form. So, you talked about finding Happy's voice, and I think his voice is so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's so clear throughout the entire book, exactly kind of, who he is. He doesn't ever kind of falter in terms of his voice and the way that he is portrayed throughout the book. But the form of the novel is really maybe a little bit random at times. It's really, as you've described it, as being non-traditional. It's not a linear novel. So we have almost like diary entries, and we have plays and scripts that he's written, and lists, and then things written from different characters' perspective. Why did you decide to have a form that was so non-traditional? And what was it like for you exploring that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because it's really the form that allowed me to do what I wanted to do and to gain an entry into his world. I think some stories, at least from my view, can best be told in a sort of scattered, fragmented way. because the idea that life is linear or, a life story is a whole, same with our careers. And the book in many ways is also sort of a workplace novel. It's centered a lot around work and politics of work. The idea that there is a linear career where it's just a clear pathway in front of us. And so all of that, it didn't make sense for me for Happy's story. I finally arrived at the sort of image that at the end we have a bag full of belongings, essential belongings, notes, stories, songs that we find and that we then use to piece his life together in a way. So this is how I, understood it for myself in the end. But I just went into it and just really sort of found a lot of freedom and fun in sort of including the perspective of a bag or a bag of flour or including food, also to give a more rounded view, because to give us sort of different rhythm and a change from Happy's sort of wide-eyed naivety, including perspectives from his family and people he works with. So yeah, that was how I arrived at that form.
That's so interesting, and actually also like quite somber, because if you think about like the greatest writers of all time from the pre-social media age, so much of what we know about them is gathered from these small bits of things that they have left behind, their possessions, but a lot of the time their writings, things that have been published with things that haven't been published. Like William Shakespeare, for example, we don't have any concrete evidence, right, about who he met with, about what his views were. This is all things that have been sort of interpreted from the work that he's left behind and some of the commentary from other people at the time and the people in his lives and his, his children and his wife and all of these other things. And there is something really quite sad and melancholy about that it is very difficult really to leave a mark on the world, and that when one is gone, when you are gone, how will you be remembered by what you did, but also like, will you be able to be remembered for long enough? I think it's a really pertinent question of our time actually as well. The more we think about people having, using social media and celebrity culture as it is, but really like, for how long will people remember us after we're gone? It's a very sad question, I think.
It is, but a beautiful association from your side. I feel a connection to what is left behind from the life of great writers, or what is essential, what do we leave for the world. And I always feel that in Happy's case, it's also the lives he touched and were touched by him, that then sort of course, that's our hope, that we do continue to live in the people around us. Yeah, but definitely also sad, sad note. But yeah, there's both in there, I think, sadness and lightness.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get into some of the themes that you write about, I wondered if you could just take a moment just to introduce your novel to anyone listening that hasn't yet picked it up. Just tell us a little bit about what it's about.
Of course, very good practice. I really need to get in practice to do that. It is about a character, a boy named Happy Singh Soni. He travels from Punjab, where we encounter him first, and we remain at his home farm for a bit. We encounter his family, get to know his world, before he then meets a mysterious and wondrous woman called Europe, who invites him on a journey. So he decides to travel to Europe, and the whole journey and his migration is not by the books. So we follow a sort of undocumented migration here. And from then on, a lot of things happen, but it's also a slow unraveling of a lot of his ideas of what Europe would be like. But first of all, he encounters, or he sort of finds himself in the food industry in the south of Europe, namely, first of all, a restaurant kitchen in Rome, and then sort of finds his way. He strikes up new friendships, but then he ends up on a radish farm where the conditions become increasingly bleak. And it is a novel about, against the backdrop of the food industry in the south of Europe and how much it depends on migrant labor, how much Europe depends on migrant labor, especially in the food industry, but also about what, how to build a life, how to make a room your home, and what's essential to survive. And also finding home in your imagination, in your dreams, in a way. So yeah, could be shorter. Sorry.
No, that's great. So we follow Happy on this journey where he goes from Punjab to Europe, and he lands up in these quite difficult jobs. And you really sort of go into detail about how difficult life can be for migrant workers. And you shed light on some of the issues, on the whole Happy's entire situation is kind of, illegal anyway. He's caught up in some really awful crimes that are going on. What was really important for you to bring out about the immigrant experience, in particular when it comes to migrant workers?
I think what was important is maybe bring light to journeys, narratives, trajectories that are not very much in the limelight or known in Europe. And like from my perspective, speaking from where, I was born and raised in Germany, this is not something that is talked about quite often. The North Indian communities in Italy, and how really since the late 90s, the Gran Padano production, a product, a cheese that is regarded as quintessentially Italian, is in Indian hands, in North Indian hands. And this is, there are parallels. So the asparagus season harvest in Germany is in Eastern European hands. And I think there are probably comparable situations in the UK as well that might come to your mind. So this is something I just wanted to, go into, but also in a wider sense to just look at the fate or the story, which might seem like a seemingly small in the grand scheme of things. And seemingly a story that might not leave a mark, seemingly hopes and dreams that never were realized, but that nonetheless left an imprint, and how every story like this is important and needs to be told, and not all of them are told. And so, yes, just to try, and it's just an attempt to, tell this story.
So did you, what was your process like? Did you do research into the food industry especially, and the experiences of migrant workers? Did you speak to people? What was your process like?
Yeah, so the reason why this story sort of started going around in my mind so early as a teenager is because stories like these, they did happen in my surroundings, my family surroundings when I was a kid. So it was prompted by a few of these stories that, show parallels. And Happy is a fictional character. That's very important. But all the realities and facts that are behind, and maybe even also the stories of Harbier and all the colleagues he encounters on his way, they find inspiration in real life. So that's one aspect. And then, of course, I did do a lot of research. And if you do look, there's a lot to be found. I spoke to people who have been working on these matters for a long time. But what I also realized is that there is. So when I try to speak to sort of activists who've been working on that matter for some time, Italian activists, it was quite difficult to talk to them because there's a lot of security issues around their work. It's quite dangerous, the things they do. So that wasn't easy, and also to talk to actual workers because the conditions are not by the books, because I allude to certain structures that I don't even want to begin to fully, I don't want to say that I even, could begin to fully unravel this, but certain things are known, certain connections are known, how these syndicates smuggle people, not just in these instances of, North Indians to Italy, but also in other instances, and how they are connected to much larger structures of crime globally. And this is not just happening in Italy, of course, it's also important, but the novel focuses on this particular, community. So a lot of reading, a lot of documentaries on the matter, also the journey crossing, into Europe, sometimes by foot, by boat, etc. And yeah.
Was there anything that you discovered throughout your research process that was particularly alarming? Because I'm guessing you went in with a level of knowledge especially from the stories of people that you knew. Was there anything that really took you by surprise?
I think it was the aspect of, and that's not the case for everyone. I mean, I think there's a North Indian community in Italy that lives very different lives now. They've been around for some time, and there is a new generation. As it happens. The story takes place around 2010. I think it's been going on since the 90s. And what for me, I guess, when I first researched about it, which now was quite some time ago that I first learned about it, how dangerous the journeys really are. Because there was just one person which was not, there was no family connection, but an acquaintance of my father's, and I think he crossed in a similar way as Happy did. But if you do, you rarely talk about it because it is precisely as it is so dramatic. And so then researching the real dangers, and then actually crossing mountains by foot, and then like freezing limbs, and how many sort of then die. And of course, we read about the boats crossing the Mediterranean all the time, daily. It's for many bad reasons in the news all the time. But yeah, so this aspect of the journey, how there are so many ways to, in which the journey itself can be fatal. That's something that for me was, apart from many other facts about accommodation as a planter or farmhand, which can also be okay and can be very, very bad. So there's a range. There's a real spectrum of ways in which this can work and go about, but also, and quite a recurring number of suicides in this sort of, in these conditions of working on farms in Europe. And not just in Indian communities, of course. But this is what I looked into.
Well, that's really really shocking, I think, like really sad, but I think really important as well to understand that side, or actually just understand in general exactly what's going on, because I think so many of us are not aware. Like, we know that there is this thing that is happening. We know that people are being smuggled. We kind of know at the back of our mind somewhere that these things are happening, but maybe we don't linger long enough to really think about exactly what's happening. And so I think the story of Happy really does such a good job in bringing forward some of those really harsh realities and forcing us to think about what's happening and the role that we can or can't play within that. And I thought that the character of Happy is so clever. Like, I really, really love the character. I don't think a co-ed character quite like him. And one of the things that I really liked about Happy is he has these imaginary conversations with journalists, and usually when he's in the outhouse. And it's really funny because I think a lot of us have some variation of that, like when we're in the shower, either we're like singing, pretending that we're pop stars, or we're like, I tend to have imaginary conversations with people that I really want to say something to, but I don't say those for a variety of reasons. But it's kind of like the space where you can have these sort of like deep rooted, maybe like the frustration you want to get out, or you want to tell someone how badly they hurt you in the past, or you just want to tell someone how wrong they were for doing something. And for Happy, he does it in the form of journalists. But I wonder for you where that, like what the seed was for that, like why you decided to do that, what really is behind that.
I think it's a combination of things. You already mentioned just now that we all might do this in variations, like imagine conversations, imagine an audience for something we do. As a child, if you have these aspirations of fame, if you're exposed to cinema, TV, or, you want to be a singer and then you sing for an imaginary audience, you dance for the crowds, and to be quite honest, I think when I was a toddler, quite a small child, I do remember learning to use a proper bathroom and then wanting to have a chat, and then, but there was no one around. And I think I had these imaginary interviews where I told people where I lived, about my parents, and what I did that day. So it really is something. The seed is from my own life. I was a child.
That's really interesting. But I think but with the character of Happy, what do you think that having that space in his life was doing for him as the person that he is?
So I do think if you're interviewed, and this also goes for what we're doing just now,
Mm.
there's an aspect where you have to be quite clear on either what you're talking about or who you are. So
Mm.
an interview sort of constitutes a sense of self in a way, especially if you do an imaginary one. So you basically just want to know who you are. So you have someone ask you, who are you? What are you doing? What are your dreams? And what will your tomorrow be about? What are your goals? And so this is something that we long for, maybe someone asking us all these questions, especially as a child. And it doesn't happen for all of us. Some kids are asked a lot of questions by their parents, some aren't. So you make them up, and you make this whole little world up. So I guess
Mm.
that's also part of the function.
That's really interesting. And I think there is something in, because, we could ask ourselves those questions, we could write them down, we could whatever, however we want to explore those. But I think there is really something different in somebody else asking you. Just the idea that there is somebody or people that are interested in you, in what you're doing. I think there's something really, I don't know, just something really profound about that.
Absolutely. It's a sort of someone saying, well done, we want to know more. And that, I mean, it can be scary because then you're afraid what to say. So just like, I might be in these moments that I now begin to talk about this book, something you dreamt up and then did, and now it's out in the world. And yeah, for Happy, definitely. It's a sort of practicing something in a safe space. What space can be safer than this confined little outhouse, in a way.
Oh, that's really yeah. No, I loved hearing you talk about that. It was one of my favorite bits of the book. I think because it's so interesting to see it on paper, because I think it is something that a lot, like I said before, a lot of us do, but we don't ever talk about these imaginary conversations we have, in the closed spaces in our homes. Um, But one of the reasons why Happy leaves his home is because his family farmland has been taken over by a company who is building a theme park called Wonderland. Now, where did the idea of Wonderland come from? Because it sounds horrific. Like there are rides that basically regurgitate trauma from history, right? Like there was one ride that was mimicking the train ride between now India and Pakistan, where people were killed on both sides, right? Like it's just awful. Like it just sounded like an absolute nightmare, like not like a wonderland. And also like it sounded almost how something is like satirical. So I don't know. Yeah, I just wondered where that came from for you, what you were aiming to achieve with it.
I understand that question. First of all, I've been sort of for some years been interested in the idea of parks and amusement parks, and especially because amusement parks across Asia sometimes are the simulacra of Europe. Like we know that the Disney castle is a copy of the castle Neuschwanstein in the south of Germany and Bavaria. So, and when I was in Shanghai, there was like a fake little Paris. Then you have similar things, wonderful theme parks across Japan. And one interesting story is how near Beijing there was like a giant copy of the Disney castle being built, but then abandoned because the company went bankrupt. And now you have these big concrete skeleton looming in the landscape. And local farmers actually took up their informal roles as guides. So they guide people through this abandoned concrete skeleton ghostly amusement park. And amusement parks for me have something uncanny as well. So I curated an exhibition in 2017, which was called Park, and I looked into that idea, and also the idea how parks are these confined, safe spaces of leisure, and that the internet is a park in a way, social media, Instagram is a park, sort of a confined space with certain rules where we can spend our free time, and so. There is a real wonderland near Jalandhar, but this wonderland in the story is entirely fictional. And my thinking was that these extrapolated versions of rides, quite satirical, as you say, the partition ride and the Rocky ride, I think they partly exist. The Rocky ride exists. So Rocky really is quite, I think, a thing in India and Punjab. He's loved, very much beloved. But the other ones might also be Happy's imagination of rides, when you stand around in a boring job all day and then you just begin to. So, yeah, there was a version of the book where there was a lot more narrative taking place in Wonderland, but then, that also changed in the editing process. But yeah, it was just a way to sort of see the idea of the, copies of European monuments combined with weird and strange rides that he maybe thinks up. And in reality, it might be quite a dreary place to work at. So,
that's interesting because I didn't pick up on that he had made, like, potentially made it up about these rides. But I guess, obviously, well, you wrote the book, so
I'll leave it open. It's just a possibility, At one point, I wasn't sure myself, but I think it's possible that he might.
It's interesting because theme parks, that are like listening to you speak, theme parks actually are very strange places in that you voluntarily go onto a ride or into a room where you're going to be scared. Like you can see from the outside what's going to happen. Like, exactly, if you go on a roller coaster, you're going to be spun upside down 17 times in 30 seconds, right? Like, that's going to happen. And still we voluntarily put ourselves through that. And I can't imagine that you would do something like that if it wasn't in a theme park. Like, you wouldn't, for example, like, I don't know, like walk in the middle of a race or something. You wouldn't like run in front of running horses or something. Like, you wouldn't do anything dangerous or anything that would potentially scare you so much. But in the theme park, it's so strange how those things are completely fine. And when you walk around, if you're on foot, all you hear from different directions is people screaming. And again, like, you wouldn't want to be in a place, you wouldn't want to walk down a road if you hear people screaming around you. But it's so strange how in a theme park, the rules are so different.
Definitely. And I never liked it myself. The same as I can't watch like horror movies, I must admit. Like the theme park experience with wild roller coasters, sort of a longing or lust for being scared and thinking I might die. It's like, I don't like it, but people do. And what I do find interesting is these miniature worlds or universes that are being built where you think like, oh, now there's a miniature Paris. As a child, I remember if there was like a miniature version of something and I could walk through and encounter it, that was somehow fun, but very tame, of course, and boring ultimately. But yeah, it's interesting what you say, that the longing for danger. But in the end, I think people only do it because they know, or they think they know, that nothing will happen. So it's this idea that everything will be fine in the end, but I can experience the idea or, the simulation of danger, or I don't know.
There is definitely that sense of like safety. Like, I know that it will be okay. I know there's been safety checks. I mean, accidents do happen, but overall, I think there is that sort of sense of comfort that, this will only go so far. Whereas obviously, like in real life, outside of a theme park, you don't know what would happen. So yeah, that's definitely true. You also, the book, there's a lot, obviously you write about the food industry, but there's a lot about just food. Like, you go into a lot of detail about radishes, and also when Happy's working at the restaurant, like there's a lot of description about food, and it's very interesting. But why did you decide to sort of go into the depth that you did, and what was it like for you exploring that? What were you interested in bringing out?
Mm, I think that I think at the very bottom of it is a personal curiosity about,
Mm.
just trying to look behind the things we encounter every day, or maybe questioning myself. Okay, I'm eating this supermarket radish. What is it actually? Like, where is it from? What,
Mm.
and then sort of looking into the idea. And because Happy is sort of a professional Googler, he sort of wants to research, but in a certain way. And I can really sympathize with that, because sometimes, especially if you grow up in a non academic household and there's not like big bookshelves around, and you don't have access to all this knowledge at your fingertips, you try to gain access as much as you can by yourself, but you might still mispronounce things because you only read them. You might do this all your life. I still do sometimes. And I think it's definitely that case for Happy, that he has the big hunger for actual like food, but also for knowledge and to, build worlds, but also in a very sort of scatter-minded way, sort of. So sometimes not going in depth, but really definitely wanting to know more. He goes
Mm.
to this frying place where he has to show up just to as a runner, but he wants to really, know about frying to feel safe, to present all this knowledge, which is not necessary in that case. It is.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess that was my motivation, also personal interest, of course,
Mm.
sort of building this whole world around the food, which is so central to the novel. Also, as of course, always an essential thing to root ourselves, to make a home, to build a home, to feel at home when you're not. Like, yeah.
Mm. Absolutely, that's really interesting. I mean, I thought it was so like just kind of the level of detail that you went to. I thought was so interesting, and it made complete sense because, especially in like Happy's opening, in the cover letter, there seems to be such an attachment for him with food, and such an interest as well. Obviously, he comes from a farming family in Punjab, so it kind of makes sense. But yeah, I just thought it was really interesting. When you were writing the book, did you know the plot line? Like, how did you plan it, or did you sort of decide as you went along? What was that like?
Yeah, I think because this book has been percolating for so many years, I think probably 20 years, there are a lot of like a whole little universe of references. But when I started writing this book and I had the cover letter, was one thing that was always clear was the ending. So I knew
Mm.
where it was going to go. And then there were different sort of scenes, locations, and maybe there was initially a bigger emphasis on some that are not as, as long now. There might be places that don't feature anymore. So yeah, it was really sculpting it from the narratives I had in mind, and because it is written in the way it is written, in these sort of shorter vignettes, you might call them, it worked very well. And then the editing process, I had a fantastic, wonderful editor, Deborah, and that really helped because I think I also enjoyed spending time in this world so much that I could have gone on forever. So it was necessary to to close the circle in the end.
Hmm. So there are books that have this sort of like non-traditional, non-linear format, but overwhelmingly not so, right? Like I think the sort of linear prose is still a very traditional form of literature. So did you find any challenges within your publishing journey? Have you been concerned about how the book may be received because of its form?
Well, I think initially, of course, sort of before sending it out to anyone, but I do feel that from the beginning, my editor understood what I wanted to do. So that was amazing. And I needed that. And I also understood that not everyone would. And I also understand that that's fine. I really, I do follow all these, maybe the worry that is, too scattered or difficult. But now in the form I found in the end, I feel it's a rounded thing for me after all this time. So yeah, I was lucky to encounter people along the way who understood what I wanted to do. Um, and
Mm.
yeah, still so happy about that. Really, so thankful.
I'm just interested because although it looks like maybe a scattered form is easier to write because it's like smaller sections and it's, you don't have to be in full flow all the time. But I actually think it's very difficult to keep up the momentum of the story and to build the characters if you sometimes are only writing like a few words on a page or a few sentences and you're writing like a script or a list or something. Did you ever feel that the novel was constrained by this sort of different form, or did you think that it enabled you actually to make it more rich?
Definitely, I definitely think it enabled me to make it more rich and also to flourish within that form and find more freedom within that form, because I also realized I needed a sort of confinement to then really, go into it. Also, yeah, definitely, there was at times I needed to pay attention to consistency of voice for sure. And again, the editing process was very helpful to look at things with a certain distance. And I went down roads that, were too much and strayed too far from the central narrative. But then in the end, I think it was so necessary for me to have all that at the back of my mind to understand. But then it doesn't show now, but it's still there for me.
Mm.
So that was necessary, definitely. And that helped a lot to then cut it down to something that, you
Mm.
know.
And so you said that like it was a work in progress essentially for like 16 years, or maybe I don't know however many years, but a long time. Um, how do you? I mean, what was that like? I have spoken to a lot of authors that say, I've worked on a novel for 10 years, and I'm just always so like mind blown by that. How did you stay committed to the story for so long? Especially because I know you didn't always have a lot of time to spend writing on it. So how did it just stay on like the back burner in your life for so long?
Yeah, I think also just to say that I didn't probably write this book for such an amount of time, which the first idea I had when I was 16, and then I tried to
Mm.
write this story and have a lot of beginnings, different versions that were all sort of put away in a cupboard
Mm.
and old computers, and some I don't even have anymore. All of these drafts. But they all somehow form part of this book, even if they're not, you can't read them anymore, but they're there at the back of the story, at the back of my mind. And in the end, this story needed to be written a lot faster to stay, as you say, also in the flow of the voice in 2 to 3 years, and then the editing process. That was necessary for me because I like to write sort of in the morning, fast and furious, let it flow. So yeah, I think that I was just I had such a motivation to get at the bottom of the story, to try to understand the character that became the fictional Happy, that it stayed with me for so long. And I
Mm.
sort of I always knew I had to write it, although of course I had other ideas and started other things, but there was a big sort of like a pull into that story.
Yeah. And so you said earlier on that it was only once you really started to explore Happy's voice and you started to write like from Happy that he kind of as a character really like came alive for you. But so obviously like as I said before as well, like Happy has a very striking voice. Like it's really almost like clear who he is. But how did you decide to build all the different parts of his personality and like where he is and who he is in terms of like his family? Where did that construction of the main character come from?
I wish I could really explain it in a coherent way. This is something that really sort of poured out. Once I finally found the entry, it did. I'm not sure whether that sounds like a cliche, but there were so many attempts before, and I think I needed to have that first person view, try to get into his shoes. Although I know I can never fully get into his shoes, that's very clear, but I try to, and then this character sort of emerged from, how do characters emerge from all the bits and pieces that preceded us, the air, myself, my family, the stories I knew, and yeah. And also had a lot of, I found it challenging at first for many years to write male characters, to be honest. And then happy, as I needed someone as happy, as special or weird or as happy to do that. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I a few months ago I interviewed an author called Marjan Kamali. So she's the author of The Stationery Shops of Tehran. And she said that one of the things that she does is she writes diary entries from the perspective of her characters. And she's like, more often than not, like most of the time, that piece of writing doesn't end up in the book. But she's just like, that is what helps me really understand the character. And I thought that was so profound because if you think about a diary entry, like you're completely uninhibited, you're writing about your deepest fears, your deepest sort of desires and yearnings, and you're just really unfiltered, saying how strongly you feel about something, how much you hate something, but how much you love something, in a way that as a person you may not be able to say those things to people in their real life. And I just thought it was such like an interesting tool to use. And it sounds like you've had a very similar experience in trying to understand happy.
Absolutely. I think it's beautiful what she did, and it was very similar. It was very similar, and I think it was writing like this that led to the cover letter, sort of deconstructed cover letter, or a different idea of an anti-cover letter, and that sort of led into the story. Yeah, that's a beautiful practice and tool she developed there. It helps.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I really enjoyed listening to you talk about that now as well. It's really interesting because I think it, like authors have such different ways of doing things. And sometimes I've had authors tell me that this character just came to me almost fully formed, which I always find really fascinating as well. But sometimes that doesn't happen, right? Sometimes like you need to really dig deep to explore who it is that's going to carry forward the story. So it's really really interesting. Um, as a writer, have you have you faced any challenges in sort of getting your first book published and just almost like finding the time to write, but just in being a writer in general?
Oh, you know what? I think it's probably the first or biggest challenge was to always writing, always wanting to write. I think since I was a little child, but then not allowing myself to because once I started entering academia and working as an art historian, a curator, partly sort of looking at other people's work and critiquing it or reviewing it or deciding whether it was good or not or thinking in these categories. That didn't help. I think I was blocked for many years because I always thought, oh my God, no, it's not good enough, never good enough, never sharing anything with anyone until I started doing sort of writing workshops, which very much felt as like a safe space with a writer and a group of fellow writers in Berlin. And then allowing myself to say, okay, this could be what I do now, and I can admit to myself finally that I might send something out. And the funny thing is that the very first thing I sent out was just a small, beautifully made magazine called First Page Mag, which sort of it's beautifully printed like a newspaper. They put it in bookstores, and it landed on the page of Alex, who's now my agent in New York, and he wrote to me, and and I've been working on Happy on the story for some time. And
Mm.
he asked me whether there's something I'm working on. I said yes, and so really I in that sense, after all these years of struggling to building up the confidence, somehow the stars aligned. And I had this happy moment where I found an entry into something which is so difficult otherwise. So difficult.
Oh,
Um,
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I can't even begin to imagine And that, of course, helped a lot to push the book to the finishing line where it was ready to be sent out. And then, yeah, it was a funny story. I actually gave birth to my daughter 1.5 years ago, and the book found its home, a publishing house, Astor House, a few weeks after she was.
Oh, wow.
Her first year was spent editing. And yeah, it's been a crazy, wonderful past years.
Oh.
Definitely. And I was very, very lucky. And even though parts, of course, were exhausting and it was a lot of work, but also love poured into it, and definitely the book as well. And there were lovely moments writing the book when, I was researching, and also I spent some time like in Italy where, then to write beautiful locations, which was a nice change. But yeah, definitely allowing yourself the time working freelance to carve out space.
Mm. Oh, that's so lovely. And do you have any advice, I guess, for budding writers?
Oh, definitely. I think for me, it was definitely, although it's as a writer, you're sometimes so lonely. You write in your own little chamber, but finding a community, um, and that doesn't have to be a feel like an MA or an MFA or whatever. It can be a writing workshop you attend, a writing group, a book group, but finding a sort of safe space in which to, allow yourself to sort of grow and not be scared because there's so many anxieties about putting out pieces of work and art that are, they really also feel like babies, and being scared what other people might think. But the work can grow so much more once you do that, and that really helped me to build up that courage.
And I think my final question for you today is, what do you hope people will take away from Happy?
Oh, that's interesting. I do hope that so for me, along the journey, I sort of fell in love with Happy as a character, and I became so close and so fond of him, and to sort of to be a companion with him on that journey for a while, and then somehow feel as if maybe his life touched your own a little bit. That's how I feel about books, right? And sometimes you can even you have memories. I have memories that are actually books, but I feel sometimes like they're my own, and or dream about things that so, but also to love and to cry in equal measure, like a good Bollywood movie would do, to because the lightness and darkness are definitely intertwined, but I never wanted to, give that sort of moral way down, but just to, you can encounter his world and then make up your own mind, do your own, research like he does. Yeah, but just to touch lives, to make people happy in a way, to, yeah.
Oh, that's so lovely, and I think he will. I think he will, and the book will, because as I've said, like it gives us so many things to think about, pose some real questions about like life, for what it means to be a person, and the ability that we have to touch the lives of other people. Like Happy touches the lives of everyone that he meets and encounters, and then obviously like there's something really quite somber about the book as well, but we won't give away any spoilers right now. But Celina, thank you so much for your time today. It has been such a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much. It was a lovely chat. Really, really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Celina for such a lively and interesting conversation. I really enjoyed every moment of it, and I hope that you who are listening did too. If you enjoyed the podcast, please follow the Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media. I would really appreciate it if you could rate and leave a review, as it helps more people find the show.